Bonjour, it's Drew, and this is a special intro for a special episode. It's special because I recorded it in Paris. It's special because my interviewee is a B2C marketer, not a B2B marketer, but I think there's a lot of insights for B2B marketers here as well. We talked about the essence of brand and how they discovered it. We talked a lot about targeting and how to think about your target somewhat differently and understand them culturally. We talked about research, and of course, we talked about gin because I am a big gin fan. Keep in mind, this is recorded in a drugstore. There's going to be a fair amount of background ambience, and just here you go. We're off to Paris. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Neisser.
In our continuing adventures of Renegade Thinkers Unite, bringing you new experiences. Here we are in a store in Paris on the Champs-Élysées, not too far from the Arc de Triomphe, and we are in something called the Publicis store. And I have a very special guest today. His name is Corneliu Vilsan, who works for Pernod Ricard and has an extraordinarily interesting background, and I'll let him tell you some of it, but let me give you the highlights. He started as an electrical engineer in Romania, got an MBA at the University of Pittsburgh, and then started working at Schneider Electric, kept going, worked at Johnson & Johnson, but for the last maybe 15 years or so, been in the alcohol, the fine beverages business, if you will. And we're standing in this liquor store, and we're looking at some brands. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
And let's pick a brand here. I see a brand that maybe a few Americans have heard of, and we were talking about this. How do you innovate in the category? And we're looking at a brand. Talk a little bit about Monkey 47. You purchased this brand, right?
Yes, it's a craft brand. We purchased a few years ago. I think it was 4 years ago. And it's made in the Schwarzwald, which means Black Forest, somewhere in the mountain area of Germany, in a beautiful boutique distillery overlooking the mountains. And it's probably one of the fastest growing brands in Pernod Ricard portfolio. It's a beautiful product and has a beautiful marketing as well.
And so what's interesting to me about this is we're going to relate all of this back to B2B somehow, so stay with us on this. But when you're a giant company, one of the challenges that you have is to innovate. And so what a lot of companies do in the US, say Adobe, they buy smaller brands for them, like Marketo or Magento. But they have a challenge, which is how do they keep the essence of that original brand while continuing to grow it and take advantage of the costs of savings at a big company. So talk about how you've treated Monkey 47 in a way that has been able to help it grow but not lose its essence.
So you're right. So you need to treat very carefully the craft brands, because one of the reasons consumers buy it is because they have a nice story and a founder behind it, which is emotionally engaged with the brand and is the keeper of the quality and of the tradition of the brand. So this is what we did. We let the founder continue to do what he was doing before. Just we provided, the distribution muscles, the financing, the quality control, and the leverage of a big company like Pernod Ricard. And he acknowledges that. For example, he had, I remember he told us 1 year ago he had an issue sourcing one ingredient and he couldn't find it on the market. So he just called the operations guy in Pernod Ricard, and 1 week later he got it. So this was a big advantage for him, and we keep a close relationship. He's part of the family.
And so the story behind it, we talk a lot about storytelling in B2B, but obviously in consumer brands and particularly in the adult beverage category, there's story is essential. What is the story of Monkey 47? Can you sort of articulate that?
Yeah, it's actually the owner is a gin passionate. The owner is called Alexander Stein, the inventor of Monkey 47, and he was working for Nokia, before, but he was in love with Schwarzwald, with the Black Forest, and with the gin category. So he found a recipe of an Englishman that was living in Germany a long time ago, and so he recreated the recipe, and he sold it by himself in a few bars in Germany before extending it to other countries. And of course, the chance he was close to go bankrupt because as entrepreneurs usually have a cash flow problem, and if the brand doesn't start to grow before you finish your resources, then you are in danger to go out of business. But he was lucky as well, and we were lucky to do a partnership with him a few years later.
And so what's interesting to me, we were talking before we started recording, by the way, we're in a liquor store, so it's going to be noisy. You'll hear some background. That is someone tearing open a carton to restock. But what's interesting to me is you have a very, I'm going to call it a precious product, in the sense that it has a lot of craftsmanship and handmade and so forth. And if you immediately put this in every place, it would lose some of that sense of exclusivity. So you've been careful with the distribution of this product.
Of course. So we follow the owner philosophy, buy one, get one. So we have very exclusive distribution. We don't run promotions at all. As you can see here, it's probably the most expensive gin, and it is never on promotion. We try to limit the distribution to exclusive stores and best bars, iconic bars all around the world, and it's working. Well, of course, this limits the volume growth, but keeps the brand in a prestigious category. And we have limited editions every year, very limited editions that are sold out in few hours. And I can tell you the guys in Pernod Ricard, they're in love with this brand. We very often drink Monkey 47. Although we have hundreds of brands we can choose from, but it's one of our favorite brands internally as well.
It's a great story. I discovered, I'm a gym fan, I've probably mentioned that on the show before, but I discovered Monkey 47 at the Monkey Bar, the famous Monkey Bar in New York City, and of course they have this gin. But as we sort of think about the brand and the story, how do people sort of discover this? I mean, that this is, we know that awareness matters. People have to discover it, and I'm like, it's one of 7 gins right here that we're looking at. So how, as a marketer, and you guys are mass marketers, how do you help them get discovered?
It's about advocacy and working with the prescriptors, as you call them in B2B. For us, it's bartenders, which are very influential, especially bartenders from the best bars worldwide. So at the beginning, you need to be accepted by them. Right? If they don't like it, you will not succeed. So they need to love the product, they need to love the brand, the story, and be convinced by the quality of the product. And it started from there. And we still do a lot of advocacy. Then it's about inviting them to see the brand home, inviting them in Germany to see how the brand is produced, and falling in love with the birthplace and the terroir, as we call it. So that's a recipe for, I would say, for many spirit brands. The most successful premium plus brands have a similar story to that.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm remembering one of the first episodes I did for the show. I interviewed Lee Applebaum, who was the CMO of Patron Spirits, and they had invested a lot in the facility in Mexico to bring people down because they wanted to show the craftsmanship. Because you don't see that on the bottle, you just see the label. But I think the influencer part, and there is an equivalent in B2B, there are lots of influencers that have an impact on it. Analysts, for one. Heavy users, if you're in the software world, you have to get the developer community involved. So there's lots of similarities here. So we talked about, and let's just sort of, as we keep thinking about this gin, how big can a brand like this get?
It will always remain niche,
Okay.
and we don't intend to make it a mass market brand. So it will, I don't know, whatever it continues to grow. We invest, as I said, a lot of money with influencers and creating unique experiences, unique liquids for the consumers. So it will never go mass market. Otherwise, we'll kill it. So it will remain niche. So I don't know. Very, very small market share, less than 1% for
Right,
sure.
right, and that's interesting. But one of the things that big companies do struggle with, and we talked about, big companies struggle to innovate, and because they're looking for the next $1 billion brand. And the problem is most $1 billion brands started as $1 million brand, and a $5 million, and a $10 million, and eventually they get to $1 billion. And so but it takes a lot of energy to create a brand like this, and a specialty brand. Okay, so as we wrap up, is there anything else that you think from a premium standpoint that marketers, listeners can learn from some lessons from the Monkey 47 story?
So have a good quality product. It's not enough nowadays. Everybody has good quality product. So this is a must, but it's not enough to succeed in the market. So you need to have, unfortunately for us as marketeers, marketing has a very important, or continues to have a very important role for the brands going forward. So creating a nice story, communicating in an engaging way with the consumers, talking to the prescriptors, to the influencers in the world. Every kind of industry has its own influencers. It's probably more important with digital nowadays, because influencers are growing without us always controlling everything. We used to control advertising in the past with the media and so on. It's not anymore. Now it's the consumer is in control, influencers are in control. So keeping an eye on what's happening in the digital world, having a close link with them, will continue to make us relevant in the market. Otherwise, if you get too far away from the consumer, then you lose contact, and you might miss opportunities, or your brand might become irrelevant.
So it always comes back to listening. So speaking of that, stay with us, and we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, more good stuff from Paris.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neisser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only, at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
All right, we're back. We moved into a different section of the Publicis store, which is really a very interesting, beautiful store. And we've looked at a wide collection of alcohol. And of course, we moved right into the champagne section in Perrier Jouet, which is a Pernod Ricard brand. And I thought that was an interesting way of starting a conversation about global and local. And how do you manage global brands recognizing the differences in culture and so forth? Let's talk about that, and maybe in the context of champagne.
Well, it's thanks for asking me this question, because I did a recent work in cultural differences among different parts of the world. I'm responsible for more than 50 countries worldwide on 3 continents, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. So we have a very diverse range of countries, and we define them in two big, let's say, categories: progressive markets and traditional markets. Progressive markets are more the countries in Western Europe and Northern Europe, where we have, from a spirits point of view, it's a big trend on low alcoholic, no alcoholic, gender equality, and wine. While traditional markets are more traditional in the sense that they are more conservative. So it's less innovation versus the progressive markets. The consumers stick to the category, and the changes are happening much slower. And it's more show-off culture, where consumers want to show they succeeded in life. So they buy, sometimes they buy brands they can't afford or they can barely afford, which doesn't happen so often in progressive markets. So from a global marketeer point of view, this is very important to think about, because you can't have a global campaign anymore. You can have, let's say, product-focused campaigns global, that we will also continue to do. But then to engage emotionally with the consumer, you need to be locally relevant. And to be locally relevant, you need to have an emotional campaign that speaks to the local consumer. And that is made more and more by the local markets, according to some global guidelines. So I think the role of the local affiliates is growing versus previously when campaigns were done centrally for the whole world. Now we see more and more what we call the lead markets co-creating with the center campaigns that are relevant globally. So we see in my region roughly 5 different cultures or subcultures dictating what you can say about the brand. Then the bigger the brand, the most important it is to be locally relevant.
Interesting. So, and you're responsible for Europe and Latin America, right?
Yeah, Europe, except France and Ireland, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. So in total, I stopped counting after 50. I think we have like 80 countries now covered by my region.
Wow, that's a lot of. And do you? Is there a different campaign for, let's say, Perrier-Jouet, which is it's a French champagne with very certain perceptions that I have about it. How do you, is that something that would get adjusted on a local market?
The way it's not always the campaign, because we can't advertise everywhere. So might be a difference in the way the market, the brand is marketed. So, for example, the channel. Some markets are more what we call on-trade, so they're more driven by the sales in the bars, and some markets are more driven by specialty store or by supermarkets. So depending on the market characteristics, we might have different ways to implement a global campaign. And then locally relevance in terms of design. If you cannot advertise, could be the design of your displays, could be the design of your leaflets, could be the way you communicate the message, or your social media strategy has to be relevant locally. So that's what happens to all the brands, including Perrier-Jouet, which is our most prestigious brand in Champagne.
And so, when thinking about in any of the research that you did on a global, what were some of the differences that you sort of identified on a cultural basis?
I will mention just one: the show-off culture. There are some countries where show-off is perceived as a bad taste, and some countries where show-off is a sign of success. And you can't be a successful businessman if you don't show it to the whole world, including on Saturday night in a club. So I think this is one of the biggest cultural difference, I would say, that that makes a big difference when promoting brands in our region. But could be also not only developed markets, but in emerging markets like Africa. You might have different parts of the country to show off culture, and another part of the country or the continent not in the show of culture. So it's a interesting point from a cultural point of view.
It's similar in the U.S. I mean, you
Yes.
go into a bar in New York City, and there will be people will buy a very expensive bottle for the table. In New York City, that's not necessarily going to happen in the Midwest, generally speaking.
Yeah.
But I would also imagine that there's lots of conversation in the U.S. among marketers about the differences between Gen Z and millennials and Gen X and of course boomers. And as brands, this is particularly in alcohol, this has had an impact on your category, I imagine, tremendously, as young people coming up, and they may have different tastes and so forth that you have to adjust to.
Of course, I'll take the example of Absolute Vodka, who in the 70s, at the time, Andy Warhol was a big influencer in the night scene in New York, in the club scene. Nowadays, the painters are not such a big influencers. It's more rappers and DJs and singers and so on. So we also changed our strategy accordingly. So we work much more with influencers, either social media influencers or influencers in their field or experts influencers in their field of activity. And this is a big change in marketing. So marketing is more granular. It's less about the bush and it's more about the pool, and letting the influencers play a role in your brand. And this makes the job even more interesting than before in marketing.
Yeah, I think it's true, and it's funny as you're talking, I'm hearing many of the same words that we would talk about in B2B with social media and influencers. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll stay with us. Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back. We're still in this wonderful, really interesting store. I mean, I'm looking at within the store there's a a very premium macaroon called, what is it? Pierre Hermé. And so we've got alcohol, and then we've got this is just it's a massive different array of
Caviar.
Caviar, yes, exactly. Oh, Petrosian caviar, which New Yorkers will recognize. Okay, so we were talking about social media and the impact that that's had on your business, and I think the same is true in B2B. One of the things that is interesting to me is you guys really have to pay attention to brand health. And the way brand health used to be measured was sort of traditional tracking, and you've sort of developed something interesting that uses social. Can you talk about that?
Yes, of course. Actually, marketing effectiveness is my favorite area. And of course, social listening is an important part of that. And we try different methods to improve measuring brand equity. We used to have the normal tracking that were not satisfying anymore and were difficult to predict what will happen to the brand. It was very backward looking. So we were looking to find out something which is more forward looking and trying to predict what will happen rather than to explain what happened in the past. So we developed a new method globally with Ipsos, I can say that, and it's combining traditional research with social media listening to take the best of both worlds. We are still interested in KPIs and brand health indicators, but we also we use artificial intelligence to analyze social media conversations, both text and video, to understand how consumers speak about our brands. Because sometimes we are, very traditional in the way we think consumers speak about the brands, but the words, the phrases they use when they consume our brands are very often different from the corporate thinking. So we are just at the beginning. We just started, and we had the first results, and it's amazing. I can say whole company is very excited about this new methodology. As I mentioned, is about creating insights using artificial intelligence. Still, the humans have a big role in that, because big data doesn't interpret the data. Yes, it's just data. The humans are there to interpret, and you need good experts to interpret those data. So I think it's probably an evolution in the market research industry, with using more anthropology and anthropologists to find out what is behind the words the consumers use, what is behind the images, the photos, the videos they take, to try to decode the message the consumers want to send to us.
And so several things that you mentioned there. Obviously brand health is so important in your category, but it's very important in every category. It's something that you as selling these types of products have always had. When you talk about artificial intelligence, you mentioned that the ability to look at photographs and video, how does that actually work?
So an artificial intelligence system will be able to decode the place where consumers actually consume our product. So based on the surrounding images, the computer can find out if you are in a bar or a restaurant or at home consuming the product. So he can read the labels. If there are any labels in the picture, you can see the number of people in the frame. You can see the mood they are into, and also analyze the text associated with that photos. So, as I mentioned, we are just at the beginning. We have a very good start of it's a global program, not only in our region, but the results are amazing. It's for the first time we use this technique to inform our decision making.
And that's what I wanted to get at. So, because one of the issues in B2B marketing is almost all of the measures are lagging indicators. I mean, first and foremost, revenue is a lagging indicator, right? Because so much had to happen before that product actually got sold. Obviously, important indicator, not an indicator, important metric, because everybody cares about it, but it's not going to tell you what's going to happen next quarter or the following quarter. So you mentioned that this becomes predictive in terms of you can see the momentum behind a brand or a category. So we can talk about that, and then let's also talk about what the kinds of things that you've learned.
So as we build more data and we have more experience, we can analyze what consumers talk now versus what they were talking in the past, and be able to predict where the market is going before this actually happens. Let me give you an example. We see more celebrity-driven brands being developed, and consumers talk a lot about it. And although the numbers are very small, when we look at the big brands and the big trends, but you can notice from social media very small trend emerging that might become big in the future. So we captured that very early from the market, which we were not able to do before because of the way statistics work. If it's not representative sample, then it will not get noticed and will not get reported. So we see that much more accurately nowadays, and this informs our innovation strategy and our product development. So this is one way to do it.
And that's funny, I think we saw over there, we saw the George Clooney tequila. I think fairly certain that Ryan Reynolds has a, I don't know if it's a gin or a vodka, but a very funny ad that we saw that he's, I think it's Ryan Reynolds, not Bradley Cooper. But that's one. And so you would actually, that would help you either identify a company that you were going to acquire, a brand that you say, oh, this could be a big momentum, or that you may adjust your marketing for a brand, try to find an influencer.
Exactly. So, for example, music is very important for us, especially with Gen Z, you mentioned before. So, if you want to market towards this generation, you want to understand better what kind of music they listen to, what kind of singers they follow, and social media is a big, of course there are other ways, but social media is one of the ways to identify these trends. And believe me, I know very few bands or singers Gen Z is interested nowadays, so we need somebody to inform us. And social media is one way to do it, together with the music platforms.
Well, I have one for you. There's a young lady by the name of Claro, who is my cousin. I think he's a first cousin once removed, is a drummer for, and they're playing with Khalid, who's a rapper in Madison. They're on a global tour right now, and this, I think she's only 20, so you can't quite hire her yet, but she's up and coming. So that's one. That's just an inside thing. So, and that makes sense from a trend standpoint. Getting back to the metrics, are you able to then distill this information into a new kind of metric for brand health, that where you can say, okay, we can look at this brand over here and say it's healthier based on this information because there is social noise, and it's more predictive?
Yes, we are not there yet, 100%.
Okay.
We are at the beginning, but we have a good signs already. We have now a global dashboard that we can see in our office in Paris, which we didn't have before. This technology helps us to look at that. And of course, having so many markets, benchmarking different markets and different brands gives us unique insights that we couldn't have before when the research was sitting in each affiliate worldwide. So even if the trends are difficult to spot by benchmarking one brand across the different markets, we can see what works, what doesn't. And comparing that with the performance of the brand in the market, you can create some correlations that can be further investigated with another research.
So one of the things that you mentioned that I was surprised about was pink gin as a trend here now in Europe. So should we expect to see more pink gin, and is that going to show up in conversations in the United States soon?
I think so. Pink gin is flying everywhere from in all our countries. There is not a single market that doesn't have pink gin flying. I think US is. I didn't look at the pink gin in US, but I think it's growing in US as well, not at the same extent. I'm sure it will come one day or another. Still, tequila I think is quite strong in US, which is not the case in Europe. But so there is some, regional differences. It's not so global anymore. But pink gin is actually came from a consumer need to have a fancier, not complicated drinks. And Gin was there to offer that experience, a fancy, colorful, flavorful drink that it's easy to make by the bartenders and consumers enjoy.
And I think there's some, I'm going to stretch here, but so what's interesting, so gin and tonic is the most popular drink of gin. It's kind of boring looking, it's been around, Beefeaters have been around for a long, long time. You make it pink, you put some tonic in it or something else, suddenly it looks new, plus you bring on probably a different group of more women perhaps, and it really refreshes the brand. And if we think about how do you keep a brand alive, and invigorated, sometimes something as simple as just a color can make a big difference.
Yeah, look, gin as a category was dying 10 years ago. It was seen as a dusty category, consumed by older people, and very few predicted what would happen. And actually, all started in Spain with a craft brand so it started about say 5-6 years ago, and then we noticed that switch in the consumer preference, and we offered consumers the option of having a tasteful pink strawberry option. And we also bought some recently another craft brand called Malfi, which is specialized. It's a gin made in Italy, and they have very many flavors. So I think it will be big in US in maybe not more than 2 years. It will be huge.
So as I think about this, and I'm going to stretch even more to help bring this back to what you who are not working in the alcoholic beverage category can think about. One, every great alcohol brand has a story, an essential story at the heart of it. And when they lose that story, they lose their way. And I would argue that every essential B2B brand needs a story. Two, we talk about purpose-driven storytelling in this, and a lot of alcoholic beverage brands have a very distinct purpose, whether it's a celebration or certain brands are associated with, say, like sailing, because it's right here after sailing, so there's a purpose for it. And I think when a brand doesn't have a purpose, it finds itself without. It's interesting, like the champagne category, its purpose is New Year's Eve, and the problem with that, of course, is it means that 40-50% of the sales are in like one day. That's a problem for a category, but you sort of learn to live with it. So there's two. Number three, we've talked a lot about, these are very competitive categories. There's lots and lots of choices. The same is true in every category that I'm aware of in the B2B market. There's lots and lots of competitors, and brand matters. And it matters because you are going to choose a brand that you recognize for the most part. It's very hard to try a new brand because you can't trust it. So recognition and awareness come back are really important. So those are three, maybe four. I wonder if you have any more sort of summary thoughts for the listeners as we wrap up this show in Paris, and that just any other thoughts and lessons learned that you think that other marketers can learn from your category?
I think another factor could be terroir, and especially Pernod Ricard. We have a great terroir for our brands. Champagne, of course, is produced only in Champagne in France, and tequila only in Mexico, and Absolute Vodka only in Sweden. Martel Cognac on the Cognac region, and terroir, I think, is becoming more and more important nowadays. It used to be less relevant, and is becoming more relevant as part of the stories. And I would say that an important factor is using new technologies like artificial intelligence in a clever way. It's artificial intelligence, but you need to use natural intelligence to make it work. Artificial intelligence by itself will not give us competitive advantage unless it's used in a clever way that is relevant to the consumer. And I'm working a lot in this field to demonstrate how new technologies can be leveraged in marketing nowadays bring the new insights and to create competitive advantage for companies.
What a great and surprising summary, because who would have thought that as we were talking about alcohol, we would be talking about artificial intelligence. Generally, we talk about the loss of intelligence. So that's a great place for us to wrap up. So Corneliu, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.